Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Wednesday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 10th of June. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date in your local weather information wherever you are in Alaska at weather.gov/Alaska. That'll take you right there. There's plenty of tools on the left-hand side of that screen to get you a little bit further into the information that you're looking for. You can always give us a call on the weather info line at 800-472-0391. Find information during the day on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube. If you've been monitoring Facebook today, you may have seen winter storm information across the North Slope. There is more snow falling there, and as we take a look at the forecast situation across the region up north, we're expecting a winter storm warning there to produce as much as 6 to 12 inches of snow by 4 o'clock on Thursday for the northern slopes of the Brooks Range as colder and wet air meet up right across the northern slopes of some of the higher terrain in the north. Now, late breaking news for you from the National Weather Service office in Fairbanks, recently issuing wind advisories for the Deltana and Tanana Flats region, as well as the eastern Alaska range. And if you recall yesterday, we were talking about some windy travel, especially north of the passes there. So if you're on the Fairbanks side of the passes, you're probably running into some chop. The winds there may gust upwards of 50 miles per hour through at least about 9 o'clock tonight. So plan on the winds to stay up, at least the gusts, through some of the higher terrain and on the northern side of the eastern Alaska range as we go into the mid to late evening hours. What you see already on the map around Healy and Denali, we're talking about a winter weather advisory. So even looking at some snow there, probably at or above 2,500 feet or so. So it's not going to be for everybody, but many people will probably have a decent chance of seeing some snow. And it looks like generally light accumulations there, a couple inches until we get into Thursday afternoon. So we have a winter weather advisory, new wind advisories posted for the eastern parts of the range, and a winter storm warning. And yes, it's June, of course, and it is always Alaska. Here is the fire danger now. On top of precipitation and cooler, wetter winds coming in from the north and from the west, we're still talking about pretty extreme fire danger, at least in some local areas around the middle Tanana Valley, southward into the Copper River Basin, and high fire danger even more widespread now across the upper Yukon, including areas around Fort Yukon, and then down into the Kuskokwim Valley, as well as the central and eastern parts of the Yukon Valley. So a lot of things still changing, and still very dry conditions continue. Of course, with warmer and drier weather coming up perhaps in the next several days, toward the end of the weekend, into the weekend, conditions will probably be exacerbated across a large part of central and southern Alaska. Here's a look at the weather pattern, and you can see some of the changes taking shape. We've got a very elongated low pressure system across western sections of the Pacific. The general flow right now is coming in pretty much from west to east. A very flat ridge right now is how we call it in the Weather Center. And as this continues to build northward, it's going to allow more of the heat to move its way out of the North Pacific and into central and northern sections of Alaska. As you look at the loop one more time, what you're not seeing now is a really strong surge from the south, or from the north, I should say. A lot of this is just kind of flattening out, but colder air has built in across the western coast and is moving eastward as we head through tonight. Here's a look at the visible satellite picture. You can see one circulation working into the Gulf, and that's pushing wet weather into southeast. The sunshine that we saw yesterday across southern and central sections of southeast, a lot of that has been filled in with cloud cover today. More wet weather around Prince William Sound and the northern Gulf Coast, and we've seen some pockets of rainfall, some of that heavy at times across the Bering Sea coast around the Alaska Peninsula. Westward, we've got colder air, a little more apparent here in the satellite picture. You can see kind of the speckled clouds here indicating more cumulus development. Cold front right about here late this afternoon, marching right through the interior. Out ahead of that, a little bit of sunshine, a little more lift or instability in the atmosphere, and we have that upward moving air that helps to build clouds up to towering heights, and so we get showers and occasionally some thunderstorms. Some of those have been around the Alcan border and generally east of the Alcan border throughout most of the afternoon. Now ahead of that, we still have high pressure that's in command across the Bering Sea. We do have some pockets of clearing, but we certainly have some very stable air here from St. Paul, where we've seen fog today, to a very heavy stratus and low deck across the central and western Aleutians. Places like Unalaska, Tarboro, and Nikolsky have been kind of on the southward side of that, so you probably had an awful lot of sunshine today. It looks like a fairly decent day there. All in all, though, things are changing across the central interior again as that colder air drops southward. So there it is on the map. Anytime you see that blue line with the pointed triangles, this indicates the direction of travel. So in this case, here's your cold front, or the leading edge of colder air on this side, pointing in the direction of travel, and this is traveling this way. So colder air, in this case, across the map is dropping south and east, and we see another cold front here across the eastern Gulf. Troughs of low pressure are indicated by black dashed lines. That simply means a wind shift, maybe slightly lower atmospheric pressure or less air on top of your head in those locations. And sometimes when those pass through, they stir up showers. They certainly stir up clouds across the Gulf of Alaska. But cold fronts are a little bit more of like a snow plow, where compared to a trough of low pressure might just be a garden trowel or maybe a little bit of a pick. Showers and thunderstorms have been forming across the Alcan border. As we mentioned, there's snow that's already been falling across the North Slope, and again, a winter storm warning in effect for the North Slopes of the Brooks Range as we head through tonight and tomorrow. Rain will be a little more widespread across the central and eastern interior as we go through tonight, and certainly southeastern Alaska. High pressure is trying to take charge of the Gulf of Alaska. That's at 1,012 millibars tonight. As we go into Thursday, you'll notice a frontal boundary working its way eastward now all the way into the northern Yukon. Snow continues across the northern slopes of the Brooks Range. There might be just enough warm air at lower terrain levels that you could still see some rain across the North Slope, but it looks like just offshore that's going to return back to snow. Warmer weather is already building out of the Bering Sea and trying to lift northward ahead of the next wave of low pressure at 1,010 millibars. And you can see the return flow way out across the west. That southerly flow coming up across the western Aleutians will bring rain and some stronger winds eventually to the western chain. But initially, it looks like it's just going to be kind of a warm-up with a little bit more heat working itself northward, and that means a better chance for faster reduction of ice across the Chukchi Sea and maybe even the Beaufort Sea as we go ahead into the weekend. In the meantime, here's your high pressure center around 1,033 millibars. It's still guiding cooler air eastward. Showers will continue across some of the higher terrain for southeast, but look at the dry air building back into southeast. Looks like conditions will be changing for you. Cold front still working itself out across some of the higher terrain of the Chugach and the Kenai Peninsula, and looks like the Wrangell-St. Elias region. A lot of this will be creeping up and over the higher terrain and then moving out of Alaska's way, leaving behind some unstable air across the central and eastern interior. The trick will be how warm does it get, and will it be too warm for showers and thunderstorms to pop? And sometimes that happens. Out across the west, a frontal boundary working across the western and central chain will stir up some rainfall there, probably looking at some occasional rounds of heavier rain. But more than anything else, this is directing some very warm air northward, and it looks like this will be across a large part of Alaska, maybe not all the way into southeast, but a large part of Alaska as we get into Saturday and Sunday and eventually into Monday for more folks in southeastern Alaska. So watch for some changes as we go ahead into Saturday and Sunday in the coming days. Temperature-wise today, you can pretty much pick out the cold front if you look really carefully here. We've got 50s in southeast, 40s and 50s, even almost 60 degrees in Homer and Kodiak Island. And then you get out to the west and there's temperatures in the 40s there. If you're going to draw one of those blue lines with the pointy triangles, you'd probably put it right about here. And boy, I wish I could do some TV magic with my finger right now, because that's exactly what I do. We've got the warm air out ahead of that, the southerly flow pumping warm air toward the north slope, and the colder air coming in behind it. So places like Juneau today were around 50, Valdez 48, Anchorage up to 55, and Golcana around 55 degrees. Had some gusts out there today. This is one of the windier spots around the state. 54 in Arctic Village, 30s west of Barrow, so the cold front would be right about in here. And to the east of that, Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse made it up to 64 degrees. So a huge difference just based on the northerly versus southerly wind direction. A huge difference in how your day turned out. If you're out across the west, places like Ambler are only in the 40s, Kotzebue Sound only in the 30s, 40s for Nome, Unalakleet also in the mid-40s. Looks like McGrath made it to 47 late this afternoon. Bethel even cooler at 45, typically one of the warmer spots in southwestern Alaska. Not so much today. King Salmon and Dillingham at or just below the 60-degree mark. Same goes for Lake Iliamna, 56 around Kodiak. And you can see some of the cooler weather effects there hitting the Bering Sea coast for the Alaska Peninsula. On the other side, it was in the 50s for places like False Pass and Cold Bay. 51 in Dutch Harbor, about 50 degrees in St. Paul today, and Shemya down to 42. Now, overnight low temperatures will be in the 30s and 40s for most parts of the interior and the west coast. Once you get out to Norton Sound, look for readings to drop to about 36 there around Unalakleet and Nome. Kotzebue is looking at 36, 29 in Nome. South Central in the mid to upper 40s tonight, so a little bit cooler. Upper 40s for southeastern Alaska, 46 in Kodiak, and 40 for Shemya. High temperatures tomorrow. Not as warm for many areas in the east, especially out toward the Alcan. Only mid to upper 60s at best, probably upper 50s for places like Northway, mid 50s for South Central after that cooler air sweeps through. Mid-50s for southeast. The North Slope in the mid-30s. Some places won't get down to, or will get above freezing, I should say, for the afternoon. So 34 in Barrow, and Kotzebue Sound already rebounding there. Shishmaref up to 41. Bethel looking at mid-50s for your daytime highs tomorrow. In the Alaska Peninsula, also just shy of 60, but it looks like a fairly nice day there. So flying weather. Well, IFR conditions in areas of snow across the North Brooks Range slopes, and then also just offshore on the Beaufort Seacoast. Showers and thunderstorms may be widely scattered around the Alcan border, especially east, ahead of that frontal boundary, and MVFR conditions that you see in the morning should improve for most areas for the Alaska Range and probably in many areas for southeast. IFR conditions, those stretch from Bristol Bay all the way out towards St. Matthew and also along the frontal boundary in the western chain. So here we go, Anaktuvik Pass, IFR to start. Some improvement during the day. The same goes for Adigan Pass. Watch for snow, especially across the north-facing slopes. Some of that will likely add up to about 3 to 8 inches, at least maybe a little bit more. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass should be looking at improvements during the day, heading for VFR and Rainy Pass as well. And it looks like Windy Pass will be watching for some showers and storms in the afternoon. VFR conditions may develop during the daytime, though, and should also improve for Isabel Pass, but watch for some convection during the day. Mentasta Pass, we expect to see improvements there as a cold front is still working into the region. Look for VFR by late day. Same goes for Tanita Pass, VFR conditions there. Portage Pass, especially the eastern side, is going to hold at MVFR through most of the day. And Chilcoot and White Pass, we expect to see MVFR conditions develop there. Now, freezing levels show that colder air is certainly dropping southward into the middle Yukon Valley. The surface freezing line there hovering just east of Galena. And then aloft, you can see the freezing levels have dropped now to about 2, 4, even 6,000 feet all the way down to Bristol Bay. For southeast, a little bit of a wider spread here. We've got some cold pockets on the northern parts of the Gulf, but most areas are still hovering between 4 and about 6,000 feet. A look at icing potential shows that most areas are still under the effect of some light to isolated moderate, mostly in southeast and the northern Gulf Coast, as well as parts of the Copper River Basin. On the North Slope, well, we're going to be watching for icing around the northern slopes of the Brooks Range for sure, generally above 4,000 feet for the worst of it, and then west of the Bering Strait above 4,000 feet there. Everywhere else, not much of a problem. The jet stream, we see 2 areas of low pressure, 1 trough here that's supporting the front moving into the western Aleutians as we head into the next couple days. But really, it's this ridge building right here that's going to control our weather and push this trough out of the way as we go into the weekend. So again, a big warm-up coming for a large part of the state. Right now, we're on the northern side of that ridge. It's just off to the west for most areas across the west coast. So this ridge is building northward. Wind speeds are fairly light and coming in from due west around 25 to 35 knots in all areas. More of a northwesterly flow for southeast, about 20 to 25 knots, and a southerly flow for the North Slope, 20 knots there. 3,000 feet, a very similar pattern, very light winds across the interior, slight pickup there in speed around the middle Tanana Valley up to 30 knots, and west and southwesterlies across the central and western chain at about 15 to 35 knots. Slightly faster winds there across the western Bering up to 40 knots, and general westerly winds coming to southeast as well. So turbulence, don't see a whole lot. There might be some bumps and grinds right through the eastern Alaska Range tonight, but things should improve tomorrow. The main focus will be out west of the Aleutians as that next wave of weather starts to creep eastward. In the meantime, enjoy your flying weather tomorrow. Be careful on the North Slope, and as always, we'll be back with a look at your marine weather here in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
The fire safety goal of landscaping and maintenance is very simple. Reduce the amount of fuel immediately surrounding your home. However, this doesn't mean your landscape has to be barren. Some plants are more fire resistant than others. One of the most important things any wildland homeowner can do is to create a safety zone or fire break around the house using these fire-resistant plants.
And there was still some brush that was potentially close enough that could have caused my house to go up if I hadn't taken that out. So it's just keeping that perimeter wide and keeping it free and the cheatgrass down very, very low, I think, is what saved my home. It gave the firefighters the perimeter that they needed to get up in here and even do whatever defense they could do to help, you know, any potential engagement with the fire. Because at least they had some room to work.
Your safety zone can consist of numerous varieties of plants, including grasses, border plantings, flowers, and vegetables. Check with your local fire officials about the best species for your area. In most areas, a safety zone should be cleared away from your home for a distance of not less than 30 feet. As the slope of the lot increases, additional clearance as far out as 100 feet may be necessary. Clearance also depends on vegetative conditions that provide ladder fuels that enable fire to climb into trees. Trees and shrubs are fine as long as dead or low-hanging branches are removed and the height of ground vegetation is controlled. Be sure to remove all tree limbs around your chimney as well as any dead branches that may hang over the roof. Accumulated leaves, needles, and other dead vegetation should also be removed. Beyond 100 feet from the house, dead wood and older trees should be removed or thinned. Consult with your local fire officials for specific guidelines appropriate for your location. Keep an eye on any limbs that may come in contact with power lines. If you're not equipped to trim them yourself, call the power company and let them know about the hazard. When it comes to routine maintenance, remember to sweep your gutters, eaves, and roof on a regular basis, especially during the hot, dry weather of the fire season. Tender, dry needles and leaves are a fire waiting to happen. Although it's very convenient to stack firewood under the porch or under the eaves, it's not in your best interest to do so. To say the least, you're inviting trouble. Stack your firewood well away from anything that's combustible, including fences and outbuildings. Outdoor incinerators or burning barrels for household trash are illegal in many areas because they generate wind-blown sparks. If they are allowed, a permit is usually required, so you need to check with your local fire protection agency about laws and ordinances. Your home should have at least 2 ground-level doors as safety exits in case of fire, and each room should have at least 2 means of escape, including a door and a window leading to the outside. This is especially true in bedrooms. Install as many smoke detectors as local regulations require, and ask your fire officials to help you plan and rehearse a home fire escape drill. Regular home fire drills can save your family in an emergency. If you do all these things, especially clearing the safety zone around your house and building a fire-safe roof, you have an excellent chance of protecting your home and family against wildfire. But can these simple precautions really yield such dramatic results? Yes. In fact, the real-life experiences of those who have done these things seem just short of miraculous.
Well, each year I'd taken an axe and cut out the brush and was just cutting that out from around the house in order to make it easy to take the cheatgrass out with a weed eater, a heavy-duty weed eater. And then every year I just kept increasing that distance out from around the house, never knowing how much was going to be enough. You've got to keep that brush clear away from your home so that the fire doesn't have any chance to get up against the side of your house.
The smoke seemed to build up quite a bit, and then I noticed about 10 fire engines coming up the street, and I ran out with the children and said, "What should I do?" And they said, "As quickly as possible, evacuate the house." I looked down at the house, and there were about 200-foot flames almost surrounding the house, and I was sure at that time that the house was gone. A few months before the fire, we heard that you should make sure the sagebrush is cleared away from the house, and he just thought, well, we might start doing that in case there was a fire.
This is beautiful country. It's a privilege and a pleasure to live here. And with that comes a responsibility not only to protect our own property and the safety of our neighbors, but to preserve the resources, the wildlife, and the natural beauty that belong to everyone. Thank you for taking time to watch this program. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to call your local fire department, Wildland Fire Agency, or state forester. Your efforts do make a difference.
Now, if you're in Kotzebue Sound, the Chukchi Seacoast, and you've been watching the ice, there's probably going to be some pretty rapid changes around some of the lagoons and the near-shore waters there in Kotzebue Sound over the coming days, not to mention what we see further up the coast as warmer air is lifting northward. So what you see today, not going to be what happens tomorrow, not going to be what's going to be there over the weekend. So watch for a lot of changes there as warm air continues to change the ice landscape. You can track this and read more about the outlook by going to weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php. There's a clickable map there and an interactive one that allows you to zoom in and explore even closer to home. Now, Thursday's marine forecast in southeast winds stay pretty light. One exception is going to be the Lynn Canal, especially the northern Lynn Canal, where we're going to see about 5-foot seas there as we head into Thursday. Otherwise, winds are light from the west and southwest across the outer coast. The inner coast to south and southeast flow about 10 to 15 knots. For Friday, winds shift to more of a westerly onshore flow from 15 to 20 knots up and down the outer coast. Seas from 7 to 9 feet there. 6-foot seas in the north. Winds come up a little bit more in the Lynn Canal. You still see a southwesterly flow through Stevens Passage and into Cross Sound, and northwesterlies in Clarence Strait. Winds still fairly light there, 15 knots with a 3-foot sea. For South Central, a variable flow inside of Prince William Sound. Otherwise, a west and southwesterly wind coming up across the western Gulf, 10 to 15 knots, a little bit stronger east of Kodiak Island. Notice the southerly flow coming up Cook Inlet, 10 to 20 knots there, a little bit faster around the Barrens and northward, and also through Shelikof Strait with a southwest wind at 20. That drops to 15 as we get into Friday there. A westerly flow across the north and western Gulf. Variable winds inside of Prince William Sound continue, and southwesterlies in the northern part of Cook Inlet. For the Alaska Peninsula, westerlies on the Bering Sea coast side and also on the Pacific side. Those winds on the Pacific, though, a little bit stronger, 25 knots, 8-foot seas in the Pacific with 5 to 7-foot seas from Bristol Bay westward down the coast of the Bering Sea. Now, as you look at Friday, a westerly flow continues there. It diminishes to about 15 knots. We're also seeing lighter winds across the North Pacific, but winds will drop to, or seas will drop to about 5 to 8 feet there. Westerlies just south of Castle Cape. For the Aleutians, westerlies for most of the central and eastern chain, 15 to 20 knots there, 6 to 7-foot seas on the Bering Sea side, and the Pacific side looking at 5 to 7. As we look from Kiska westward, we see those southerlies returning there ahead of the weather front that's already marching eastward, and that's going to draw up that stronger, warmer flow with seas from 5 to 6 feet. As we get into Friday, you can see that's picking up now, the small crafts. Southerlies there from Kiska westward, 35 knots with a 13-foot sea. Otherwise, central and eastern parts of the chain looking at the return flow also working into your region with that southerly warmer flow, 20 to 30 knots in all areas. 5 to 7 foot seas in the north and also across the Pacific with seas in the west from 13 to 14 feet. Across the west coast now, southeasterlies across St. Lawrence Island, westerlies cutting across the Pribilofs and into Kuskokwim Bay at 20 knots with a 5 to 6 foot sea, and southwesterlies right in the middle from Nunivak Island westward towards St. Matthew, also running around 20 knots. For Friday, southwesterlies still relatively light closer to the coast, 15 to 20 knots, and 20 to 25 knots a little bit further out into the Bering, 6 to 7 foot seas there on that southerly wind reaching up to 25 knots for St. Matthew. For the North Slope, northwesterlies are dropping in that colder air across some of the higher terrain, especially the north-facing slopes of the eastern Brooks Range, where a winter storm warning is in effect tonight. 20 to 30 knot winds there from Prudhoe Bay eastward. Be a little bit stronger over the ice, but out across the west, you can already see those changes coming in from the south. 10 to 15 knots there with seas relatively small, about 2 to 3 feet there. Those pick up, though, on Friday and bring in even more warming air. 20 to 25 knots in the Chukchi Seacoast and outside of Kotzebue Sound. 4 foot seas are expected. Even southerlies returning to places like Dead Horse, Prudhoe Bay, and Barrow at 10 to 15 knots, still holding onto a westerly flow around Kaktovik for Friday. Recapping tonight's weather, it's going to snow across the northern-facing slopes of the eastern Brooks Range. As I said, a winter storm warning is in effect there. That'll go until about 4 o'clock tomorrow, expecting around 3 to 8 inches of snow, maybe isolated amounts of higher snow totals. So most areas will be looking at rainfall, though, the further south you go. One exception, though, would be areas around Denali and Healy. You're under a winter weather advisory for a few inches of snow, generally about 2,500 feet, though, and that is going to catch a few people. Watch for some slippery conditions in that case. And wind advisories are in effect for the eastern Alaska Range and the Deltana and Tanana Flats region. Those areas could be looking at gusts up to 50 miles per hour as we head through tonight. By tomorrow, the front's moving eastward. Rain is possible for southeast. Winds should start to slow down, and skies will gradually clear up as we head into Friday with warmer weather heading into the weekend. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.